on. So let's just go right to the first step, which is downloading Bootstrap. And you see you have all these things here. This is CDN. I can actually just link this to my page and serve it from their website, which is fine. As a matter of fact, let me do that instead of bothering with doing anything. And I just need the CSS, so I'm going to copy this, mosey over, put this in the head of my thing here, right? So now I have Bootstrap being loaded from the website, and I'll have all these things available to me to use, right? Actually, no, let's download it because I want to show it to you. Here we go. I'm downloading it because you're going to get a bunch of gobbledygook that you may not know what's in here. So you see this is DIST means distribution, right? So what gets distributed, when you open it up, you'll see you have CSS and JavaScript, and look at all of these things in here. Complicated to understand what you should use. Now we're going to ignore the JavaScript for now. We will definitely pull it out when we talk about JavaScript. You'll see here that Bootstrap actually has the grid separated out. So if you only wanted to use the grid, which is all we want to use now, well, you could use this one, or you could use this one. When you see .min, it means it's been minified. All the white space has been stripped out because technically the white space doesn't matter when you're writing these files. And that makes the file smaller, say 48 kilobytes versus 65 kilobytes. Don't worry about the map. Reboot is something that you need. I believe if you're using Grid, you're going to have to put in the reboot. That is basically their normalized.css. It's just their own version, minimized the same. And then there's Bootstrap CSS that is the whole kit and caboodle. So let's actually just look at that real quick in Atom. And so you see, well, these are CSS variables, too complicated to tell you about there. We have a lot of just different styles that they've just put on everything. Let's look at their reboot again real quick and see reboot.css, right? The reboot, we saw all that in the front there, so we definitely don't need to add reboot if we use if we use the whole thing. So I'm going to just leave it pointing at this because it doesn't matter. And that's the first step. We had to download it and get it installed or point to the CDN, right? We need that CSS code available to us. So next, I'm going to show you this. This is the grid system, and that's what we're going to use. You'll notice if I jump into my responsive kind of thing here, you'll have all these classes. And what you'll do is as you change the size, you see the way that these now are stacked upon each other versus when they're here, they're next to each other, right? This column E4. That's the important thing to know, and I'll talk about it as we go through it. So let me code live here, knowing what I know about Bootstrap, right? So right now, let's start a start a live server, and now let's see. First, I need a div, and I will close it. And that's nothing big. We still don't see anything. So what do I need? I actually need a new file here, and I'm going to call this main.css, right? Because we have this Bootstrap coming. So underneath it, right, I want to start overriding things. So I'm going to go ahead and say link rel equals style sheet. And we'll say href equals css main.css, right? That's what, whoops, gotta close it. Okay, so that we have that there. Let's see what else I need to do. Why did you not? I thought I gave a new file here. Is there no new file here? Sometimes this needs to be refreshed. Is there a refresh path here? No, I'm gonna do this. File, open, Bootstrap, open. That was the file tree. I thought I put in a new file. Maybe I didn't put in a new file. Let's try that again then. I'm going to say a main.css. There it is right there. Okay, so I'm going to give myself a background so that we can see what's going on here. I'm going to do some things. I'm going to give the body a background color of, just give it a simple EF, very light gray. And we mosey over here and we see it's just a very light gray background. the next thing you need to know about how Bootstrap works is that you need to wrap your page in a container div. And what that means is that you give something a class of equals container. And I'm just gonna, just so that we have something in here, I'll type some gobbledygook. And now when I go there, we don't see anything really. Whoops. Oh, that's because I stopped the server. All right, let's go. There we go. So here we see it here. Now without that class of container, let's put some CSS on that, right? Dot container, and we're gonna say background. Actually, let's give this one a background of EF, and let's give this a background of black so we can see exactly what's happening. So here we see this class of container has put a max width on this for my desktop. But notice as I go through these breakpoints, as I make my browser smaller, until I get to a certain point, right? It is it's setting these widths of the website. Okay, and now of course, do you see what's going on here? The reason that's going on here is I did not put in the meta tag for responsive. So let's go ahead and make sure we put that in, right? So meta, yeah, it's easier for me to say meta responsive. These are things I totally just cut and paste all the time because I never know them off the top of my head. Do it, and there we go, right? So now that should handle not making that kind of mess up, okay? There we are. Now we're responsive and everything. Almost forgot about the responsive tag here because I was so focused on just teaching you Bootstrap. So here you'll see that the way that Bootstrap works is not truly responsive as much as it is adaptive. So there's a couple concepts within responsive web design. You'll notice that the container is this size, and then when I get to the breakpoint, it's always this size. Until I get to the breakpoint, it's always this size. Till I get to the breakpoint, it's always this size. And then at this point, it's adaptive to it's responsive to the thing. That's because this is set in an absolute pixels instead of a %. That's the way Bootstrap chose to handle it, so that you have these kind of set widths of your website views. It's another way of doing it. It's, there's a lot of decisions as a designer whether to do it that way or make it fully, every single %. Okay, that's the first thing you need to know. Also, the container obviously centered this, right? Because if I get rid of the container class, right, it takes up the whole side of the thing here. This div, right, takes up the whole thing. So we don't want to get rid of the container class. So we know we need a container class first. That's our first step for any page we develop with Bootstrap. First thing you do, just like how on your mission websites I've usually told you to write a wrapper class, that's the same thing. But they call it a container. Okay, so now in Bootstrap Grid world, there are really two major parts. First, you need to set up a row context, and then after that, you need all of the column items inside of it. And we do that simply by saying div class equals row, and I'll close this with div there, and I'll go back to writing a little gobbledygook. Okay, and so you see nothing really has changed. And the thing to that is that this one. You really doesn't do anything without you putting in these items. This row is basically going to be setting up our flex parent. So row is technically a flex parent. So that's easy. So basically every section that you want to have, you set up with a row. So you could think of, remember in our semantic HTML, these as sections. You don't have to use div, right? I can use section, right? But I'm just going to use div because why not? And the next thing I have to do is set up some kind of column context. And so columns work in that they always use a class that starts with col dash, and then you either put in a number or you put in a size, a dash, and a number. And that number is a number between 1 and 12. Okay, so let's do this. Div class equals col dash 12, right? And I'll close it, and I'll put in blah, 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 right? And what we'll see is no change, really. You might notice that there is some change to the padding and things, right? And so I'm going to start inlining some styles so we can see things and make it easier on ourselves. Style equals background color, and I'm going to call it wheat, okay? And so you see that 12 is how many columns every row is based on, the number 12. You can never have more than 12 inside of a single column. And because I called this one 12, it's going to be 12. So if I called this one 6, notice it's half the size, right? Because there's a 12-column grid underlying the structure, and 6 is half of 12, and so this is now 50% of the size here. So that's what's going on there. And so in that case, right, maybe I want a second column, so I'm going to go ahead and take this, put that there. I'm going to call this, I'm going to change this one to aqua, and here you have, now we're going to have really terrible colors in this. Again, if you're using the keywords for colors, I can guarantee your color design isn't very good. Okay, so you see what we have here. We have these 6 and 6, and so they line up perfectly. Now what happens if I call this one 7? Well, it knocks down to the next because you can only add up to 12 for a row. So that's something to know. Each row should add up to no more than 12 unless you want it to wrap down below. Okay, so these are the column 6 and the column 7s, right? And you could think of this as the, remember we talked about mobile first and responsive. So you're going to use this, these col dash, actually in this class you're not going to use these col dashes as much. What you're going to use for this class, what I'm going to force you to use this for this class, are the breakpoint size and then the how many columns you want, right? So again, always be looking at documentation here. I'm looking for where it is. Here we go. Here's our things here. Actually, well, I guess the truth is you will use these cols even for the smallest ones. They use the class prefix of SM only if it's to be applied for lower. This one would be applied to the small size and above. So I misspoke. You will use this. This is the one you probably won't use a whole lot unless you only need it to affect the smaller size, col-SM. As far as medium, right, we see medium is the breakpoint, the maximum container, which is 720. It takes effect at 768 and above, and we use MD for medium, LG for large, and XL for the extra large, right, above 12. So we can use this to make different layouts. So remember, right now, where are we at? We're at this. Well, I can add more things. So let's say by default I want it to be 50-50, right? And we're in responsive. So let me go down here like this, right? It's 50-50. Now I want it when I get to a tablet to for these to change to 100%. So I'm going to say col dash, right, medium, because that's the tablet size, 768 pixels, and I'm going to say 12. And I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to also make it 12, right? So when I go there, and I get to 700, watch this right here, 768, see how it jumped down, because they're both filling up 100% of the 12 parts, and so it jumps down to the next row. So what I've done is I've changed the way it lays out. So you'll probably actually wind up doing this opposite of that. You'll probably usually say, oh, I want this to be 100% when it's on the smallest size. Maybe here I want it to be half. And then let's add a third one. And let's see where we're at, right? So we have this third one that jumped down there. Well, let's add a fourth one because 4 is a better number. Right, so we'll have this, right? So we see, let's change colors. Let's make this one violet, and let's make this one chocolate. I don't know, these are terrible colors, right? So you see what's going on here. When we get to the smallest, look, they're all at 100%. I get to medium, they're at 50%. And now what if I want them on the largest size, or not even the largest size, but the next size up? Col-LG, I'm going to make them 3, right? Because 12 divided by 3 equals 4. We have 4 things. So I'm going to go ahead and add this to the others, right? And now we see when we're at this size responsively, I've got 4. This size I've got 2. And this size I have 4. Okay, so I hope you understand this concept. This will take a little bit getting used to. It's like adding another curveball because you're actually learning Bootstrap here, because you have to look at their column, their documentation. And I'm going to pull that out in 1 second. But I just really need you to know at this point, and especially for our game when we come in, you need a container first. Each thing you need a row, right? So to prove, I'll make another row. I'll just copy this row over, right? Copy the row, and now you see we have these 2 rows, and of course they have all the same code, so they're all working the same way, right? But you see how that's working. The last thing I just want to make sure you're aware of is documentation. So you go to the website and you look on the left here, and you'll see this over on the left. For your documentation of the container system and the grid system, you'll look at here, at this where it says layout. There's the one called grid. That was a page I was just on, and it'll explain a lot of things for you. The other thing that you may look at in this class is probably the components, because again, this is where it's really helpful to do things. There's all these different components that are already built for you. For instance, a nav bar. The whole top of the bar, this bar right here is got a thing of nav bar on it, I guarantee it. And so what these components are is what you look here, you'll see all of these HTML patterns, and you just fully cut and paste it. And then what you do is you update whatever content you want. There may be a couple items that you have to take out. There may be some things you want to change. But for the most part, they have lots of examples as you go down it. And then you just do, like, say you want one less, you don't want this disabled. So you cut and paste this, you remove the disabled LI, right? So you need to use these frameworks, you still need to have that base knowledge of HTML and CSS to know what you want to do. And so that's what you're going to do. So that's Bootstrap really quickly. When you come into class, we'll do a Bootstrap game, making sure you understand how to use the grid system. And that'll be our last class before we get into Boss Battle 2, where you'll actually, with the help of Bootstrap and your knowledge of responsive web design, make a landing page.